and welcome to my YouTube channel, High Level Coder. And in this video, I'm going to discuss about how we should design our REST endpoints. I think all of you have definitely heard the word REST and REST services because REST is the order of the day. So it is very important for all of us to properly name our REST endpoints, because in most of the cases, we will either implement a REST service or we will consume a REST service. The advantage of using a proper naming standard is that anybody who is going to consume our service will be able to actually make out what our service does and what is the purpose of the service. Okay? But even before we go into the naming of the REST service, let me give you a quick recap of what REST services are. So REST services are actually, you can think of them as some utility functions which are exposed in the web and which you can actually access over HTTP. For more details of HTTP and REST, you can also refer to my other video which is over there. Now coming back, so a couple of important things regarding the REST services. Since the REST are essentially some functions which are exposed over web, these functions need to have a unique name, which is nothing but the URL of the REST service, which you can see here. So if you see at the bottom, the unique name of the REST endpoint is basically the later part, API/1/customers, and then it is prepended with HTTP : and then the IP, which may be localhost during local development. So this is how a REST endpoint is actually uniquely identified either when it is running locally or in the server, and it is very important to understand this. So let us try to understand what are the main rules that we need to follow for designing the REST endpoints, because if we follow the rules, then anybody who is actually consuming in our REST service will be able to understand without any documentation or without any help. So number one rule is to actually design the REST endpoint in a way that we can actually split the endpoint into two parts. One is the actual endpoint itself, which is maybe API/1/customer, and the other part is basically the action on the endpoint. So we can think of the REST endpoints consisting of two parts. One part is the actual endpoint or the actual resource, and the second part is the action that we want to take on the resource. Now on the resource part, you can think of the resource as similar to the master tables in our database, like any kind of nouns, like maybe customers, students, schools, vehicles, and whatnot. Anything which is a noun is a resource, and what we want to do on the noun is basically the action on the resource. The action on the resource can be any one of the HTTP verbs, but mostly we use one of the 4 HTTP verbs like get, post, put, and delete. So that's rule number one, like design the REST endpoint in a way that it reflects the resource name and the action on the resource. Second rule is, if you want to do any filtering, sorting on that particular resource, say for example you want to retrieve only the active customers or customers of a specific area or customers of a specific age, then use the query parameters of the URL. What is meant by query parameters? Anything which is present after the question mark in the URL. So here the query parameter is active equal to true, where active is the query parameter name and true is the value. So use query parameter judiciously to represent any kind of filtering or sorting. And third is, if multiple versions exist, use a version number. Like I have given here API 1 or API 2, like that. So these are some of the rules, but before I proceed to the next part, let me quickly tell you a couple of things. If you like my discussion, then please go ahead and subscribe to my channel and like my video and stay along. And also please click on this link, because I also have a blog post where I explain the same idea. And I think maybe you can give the blog post a read and then come back to this presentation, to this video, and see it once again. I think then it would be best for your learning. Okay, so let us see the other rules. The next rule is use the URL to represent any hierarchy of resource. Now what I mean by that, I will show you as an example, but at a high level, if there is a hierarchy of resources, like there are multiple employees within a department, then you can actually show it as departments then slash employees, which means the employees fall under departments. But I will again explain it with an example. Rule number 5, often we actually want to retrieve a resource by its ID, which is normally numeric, but it's always better to actually use an UUID, which is an universal identifier, because then the service would be safe from any kind of security breaches. And rule number 6 is it is always better to use some kind of pagination so that we always serve a limited number of resources, because maybe we do not know if for a particular query, if the resource size is 1 million, then it will crash both the server and the client. So it is always better to restrict the size of the resources. So these are the main rules that we should follow in designing our REST endpoints, so that people will understand that it's from a professional developer, and we'll also be able to easily use that. Okay, so let us see some quick example. Like here is a quick example of how we can add a customer, we can retrieve a specific customer, or we can update the customer, or we can delete the customer. Again, as you can see, the URL represents the noun, or basically the resource, which you can think of as the master table in the database, and the varp is actually indicating what action we are taking on the resource. So we can use the same URL type to either create, so the post is normally used to create the customer, and the get is used to retrieve the customer, and put is used normally to update the customer, and delete is used to, of course, remove that customer. You can see that similar kind of URLs, but with a different action, are used for different purposes. The thing here is, you might be wondering, like for this creation of the customer or for this updation of the customer, how are we providing the details of the customer? So we normally, for this post or put, where we actually also need to provide the details of the customer, we provide it as a separate JSON file or as a separate JSON object to actually supply the details of the customer. Now, another example where we can see a hierarchy of resource, and also we can see filtering of the resource. So if we look at the first example, this is how we can design a REST endpoint to retrieve the employees of a specific departments, rather the senior employees of a specific departments. So here you can see a hierarchy, like employees fall under departments, and also a filtering, which is by the type equal to senior. The next one also denotes a hierarchy, like I am retrieving the loans of a specific customer and also the active loans of the specific customer. So I hope this is clear to you, like how we should design the hierarchy of the resource and also the filtering. But of course, please also feel free to go to my blog, which is also mentioned below, because if you enjoy reading first and then seeing the video, I think that might be mutually complementary. Now, before we conclude, some forbidden things which we should not do while designing our REST endpoints, because if we do them, then anybody who is going to look at our REST endpoints will understand it's from a non-professional party and will likely not believe us. So number one is never use varps in REST endpoint names, like API 1/create customer. This never works because the varps are there for the HTTP. So in the URL name, never use the varps. The URL name should only contain the nouns which represent the resources, because you can think of the resources as basically the database tables. And then never use file extensions and never use underscores. Always use dashes or hyphens. Like say for example, I need to use a name which is business customers. Then I will use something like business-customers. And never use an uppercase in URL name. So these are the different forbidden things which we should not do while designing a REST endpoint. Okay, so that's it. Thank you for your patience. I hope it was useful, and maybe you can again go to my blog and come back to this video and rewatch it. And last but not the least, if you like my session, if you like my explanation, kindly subscribe to my channel and like my video, because that's going to motivate me. Thank you very much.